Welcome back, guys, to another episode of the JPS Education Portal podcast. And I am delighted to be here with Luke Twyford and Martin Charles Ruffalo. Welcome, guys.
Hello, how are we doing?
Hey, guys.
I hope you got the response that you were looking for, Luke. Now, guys, in this episode, we're going to be discussing cardio. So to kick things off, we're going to talk about Luke's blog, which was Cardio, How Much is Too Much, and whether or not it impacts our muscle gain and strength. So, Luke, talk to us about, some of the common misconceptions surrounding cardio and performance in the gym specifically.
Yeah, well, I think, and the reason behind kind of the idea for the blog in the first place is a lot of lifters, especially those that maybe aren't too well versed in the literature, are very quick to kind of brush off cardio as being almost like a black and white with resistance training, in that, okay, cardio is this separate entity, therefore I don't really want to engage in it because at best it's going to do nothing, and at worst it's going to impact my ability to train in the gym and recover, and basically it's not really going to help either strength or hypertrophy gains. And I think we're kind of now realizing that that's just simply not the case. And according to like the literature into concurrent training specifically, which is obviously can go as far as talking about cardio and resistance training performed in the same session, but then also looking at cardio and resistance training even just performed within the same program, so not necessarily on the same day or the same session, but just kind of in conjunction with each other across a training week. We're seeing that it's a lot more nuanced than that, and realistically it comes down to more so what you're doing, so kind of like the modality of cardio that you're doing. We know that things like running, for instance, are very, very high impact. I think it's about you're putting 4 times your body weight through your foot every time you take a stride when you're running. Obviously that's going to have an impact on the nervous system. The nervous system's having to do a lot in order to kind of recover from a bout of running, but then also thinking about kind of the impact on the muscles and your ability to recover as a whole. Obviously then, like, if you're someone who's really looking at kind of optimizing gains, especially in the lower body, running's probably not it. It probably just isn't it. But then something like cycling, where it's a lot kind of there's a lot less impact. In fact, it's no impact at all. And the motion itself is obviously going to mimic what we're doing in the gym a bit more kind of directly. That's going to be a better choice. So that's obviously the first way we need to look at cardio in terms of what it can provide, or not, kind of the impact it won't do. Is that, okay, what's your modality? Can we make it work to have the least amount of impact on the training you're doing? Yes, we can. But then also thinking about, like we kind of spoke about earlier, like how the proximity to your training session, right? So if we want to include cardio, but the goal is to maximize hypertrophy, for instance, it doesn't make much sense kind of having a 30-minute cardio bout or session prior to your training, because by the time you get to your training, you're going to be fatigued. Even if it's not very much, there is going to be some level of fatigue. You've used up any energy stores, and unless you're kind of having carbs throughout your cardio session, which, unless you're kind of a marathon runner, you're probably not doing, that's going to impact your ability to perform. And then obviously even just as a whole, like, okay, how can we then separate or prioritize, looking at how we can prioritize training to just so it has the least amount of interference. So like ideally you'd probably want to separate your resistance training by on separate days to your cardio days, especially as we get into higher intensity more higher intensity bouts of cardio. But then even then there's research to suggest that just having your cardio after your resistance session, for instance, probably isn't going to have a whole heap of impact on your ability to kind of make gains, to adapt. Yeah, especially if you're kind of fueling sufficiently and recovery as a whole is okay. So that's really what kind of a large portion of it is. It's not about, okay, it's one or the other, it's black and white. It's like, okay, how can we strategically implement cardio within a program to kind of minimize gains? That's I guess the first real thing I cover. Are we all following along with that?
Yeah, yeah. It's a really good point. So modality, the intensity, and obviously the overall like volume of the program. So I guess to take a step back, what would be some of the reasons that people would want to introduce cardio? Are there any benefits for their muscle growth endeavors outside of, say, let's just for example, say they enjoy doing cardio, they want to include it. Are there any reasons why people should include some cardio into their training program so that they can get better gains?
Yeah, that's a great point. And I know you said you kind of brushed past it just around like someone wanting to do cardio, but realistically, like adherence is a massive part of like making gains when we train or getting the results you want. And if it comes down to, okay, well, this individual is going to more closely adhere to their program if there's some cardio involved, and it kind of breaks up their training week. It's not just resistance sessions. They kind of they split it up with a cardio session. If that means they're gonna train more consistently over a longer period of time, then that's a massive kind of plus there for including kind of some portion of cardio. But then from kind of a physiological standpoint, thinking about, well, okay, if someone's having a like very low level aerobic fitness, so they're getting like really kind of out of breath, they're struggling to complete sets because their lungs or their cardiovascular system
Are you listening to
simply
this, Marty?
he is indeed. Yeah, so if someone's physically struggling to keep up with a set, especially as we get into those like higher absolute loads or higher rep ranges, working towards maybe 15 reps, and someone's really struggling to hold on because they're running out of breath, then well, okay, what's the best way around that? Yes, we can obviously steer away from greater loads or steer away from higher rep ranges, but that's not going to work forever. So in this case, like including some low level, probably doesn't need to be much, but some low level aerobic cardio, so continuous cardio, whether it's depending on the fitness levels, just an incline walk for an extended period of time, or maybe even you do want to do some more anaerobic fitness, so intervals if someone finds that more enjoyable. That's going to allow them then to be able to push more in their sets and ultimately not miss out on those gains that they otherwise would have been because they're pulling a set short because they physically can't kind of keep up with it because they're kind of running out of breath.
Awesome. Marty, anything you want to add?
Uh, yeah. So, question, Luke, does just going for a walk count as cardio? Because some people, might be under the impression that that is cardio, but is that the cardio you're talking about?
Well, again, I suppose it depends on the fitness level of the individual, right? So like we talk about when we look at running, for instance, a big portion of improving someone's ability to run is staying in what we call like zone 2 cardio, which is kind of a given percentage of maximum heart rate, right? But what then if that individual finds that they're in that percentage of their heart rate, let's say it's kind of 65 to 75% of maximum heart rate, but they're in that just from walking. Well, yeah, that's going to be cardio then because it's challenging that portion of the cardiovascular system. Therefore, like it probably won't be forever, but for a time, yeah, simply going for a walk is going to be enough to kind of elicit those cardiovascular gains, I suppose, and then eventually they'll get to the point where they'll need to increase the parameters, whether it's duration,
Yeah.
intensity, and so on. But yeah, walking can for some individuals
Yeah.
be like classed as cardio for sure.
Yeah. Well, that's what I was trying to get at. So, what we're talking about here is putting a certain level of stress on the cardiovascular system. And I think if people start to think of cardio as just another form to put stress on the body, it's just another form of exercise we use to put stress on the body that still puts stress on the muscles, but just happens to stress the cardiovascular system a little more than resistance training does. I think we can move closer to being able to, unite resistance training with cardio, because when you think about it, resistance training also stresses out the cardiovascular system, just not to the same extent as cardio does, right? So we're just directing stress to different areas of the body. And for a lot of us, going for a walk might not actually stress the cardiovascular system as much as is required to cause adaptation. So if you're a pretty healthy individual with a decent level of cardiovascular fitness, you're not overweight, going for a walk might not cut it for you. But like you said, Luke, there's a lot of people with a very low baseline when it comes to cardiovascular fitness. Their ability to get blood to working muscles is somewhat compromised, whether that's because of their body weight or because of just their general level of fitness. And if that's the case, then yeah, walking could be classified as cardio at that point. But just like we do in the gym, we progressively overload the stress that we place on the muscular system. We have to do the same when we're thinking about cardio. So what once was a sufficient stressor from a cardio perspective might eventually just become insufficient to cause any adaptation, and we can't really call it cardio really at that point. I mean, you could, but it's just not as effective as it once was.
And
so
something on that,
yeah,
Martin, I think that's really important to touch on for people from a practical sense, is that the cardiovascular system and your aerobic capacity does adapt much, much quicker than your musculoskeletal system does. So the rate at which you should be overloading your running or your cardio will have to be a lot quicker, because what was once a stress on your cardiovascular system won't be a stress for very long if you perform the same bout of exercise repeatedly. Whereas when it comes to a stimulus for hypertrophy or strength, because those adaptations accrue over much longer time periods, a stressor can be sufficiently stimulating of adaptations for quite some time. Whereas because our cardiovascular system adapts very, very quickly, our cardio workouts usually fall below an overloading stimulus quite quickly. So people do need to be aware of that, because I see a lot of people who do they go for a run for 20 minutes and they'll run the same distance, for example, and then they wonder why they're not getting any better or any faster. And it's because if you just do the same thing over and over, you're not going to get any better. But your aerobic system is quite renowned for adapting very quickly.
Yeah, the other thing to consider there, especially if someone is starting from basically scratch, is, like Luke alluded to earlier, the level of joint stress that certain types of cardio might come with. So what I have observed over the past few years, as the running trend has kind of blown up, is that people will advance their running pretty quickly because they feel good and they are adapting. Like you said, Jacob, they are getting fitter, but their joints just aren't able to handle the stress that cardio comes with. Often that's running. And that's likely because they don't have the right preparation for it, and they're not really programming it. And so that also has to be balanced out.
We don't
with,
tell them that because we want them to get hurt and come back to
and come back to the gym. Yeah, see the physio,
so
pay money.
you guys just go out there, overload as much as you can, and hurt, come back and see us. All right.
So, so the point there is that yes, that has to, the cardiovascular adaptations and the rate at which you progress your cardio needs to be balanced out with the tolerance of your connective tissue, or else you won't be able to do your cardio at all.
Yep, totally. And I think that's one of the biggest mistakes people make with most exercise in the first place, is that they ramp up too quickly. I don't think that's exclusive to cardio, but I think people just feel those effects a little bit more, when they blow out their ankles and knees and hips from pounding the pavement. Luke, so if people want to minimize the disturbance that their aerobic activities have on their gains in the gym, what are your primary pieces of advice?
I mean, as we've kind of alluded to here, like realistically, running's probably not it. Like, for if you're really hell bent on muscle hypertrophy on like strength, especially lower body strength, like running's just not it. You probably want to be looking at things like cycling is going to be a great one. Even
Swimming,
swimming's fantastic. Yeah. Very, very low kind of
battle ropes.
yeah, low impact. The only
Yeah.
thing is just going to be making sure that you're kind of technically proficient because swimming's harder than it looks. Like how many adults can say that they can just get into a pool and then
I don't think Martin can swim. You can't, can you, Martin?
Martin can't swim at all. There you go.
That's because he's got a hemorrhoid.
It's true.
Yeah.
I mean, at least I can
Um,
say that if you put me in a pool, I won't sink. That's kind of
you
all
won't
I've got
sink.
going for me. So, um,
Well, the way Martin dries his toes, I'll tell you what, he might as well have flippers for feet at some point. It's just going to be one flipper. I don't know. There's going to be no toes to slow him down.
yeah.
Okay, so the minimizing joint stress is a big one. What about the placement of cardio? Should we do it before we train, after we train? How long, between our training sessions? What's your advice there, Luke?
I'd probably, again, if we're looking at what is most kind of quote unquote optimal, you'd probably want to keep it to aerobic. So like low impact, low stress on the nervous system, and just save it for like off day from resistance training. So I think even just the general recommendations from the US body that looks at kind of World Health Organization, that's the word I'm looking for. Just their general recommendations on kind of like 20 to 30 minutes of aerobic, kind of low to moderate intensity aerobic exercise on off days, which for most of us is 2, 3 times a week, is going to be sufficient for like supporting just baseline cardiovascular fitness, which again will be enough for most people. So yeah, at worst case, you probably want to keep it till after, like let's say you've only got the one day and the one session to do both your resistance training and your cardio. Just do whatever first you are most wanting to prioritize. So you'd start with your resistance session in this instance, and then finish up with kind of 20, 30 minutes of whatever it might be, like a cycle or the elliptical or a kind of a walk, an incline walk. That's probably the best way to look at it. But yeah, even if you can separate those two sessions, so do your resistance in the morning, go through your day, have a couple of meals in your system, and then do your cardio in the evening. That's probably, again, a better way of looking at things.
Awesome. Okay. Well, guys, there you have it from Luke. Some tips and tricks when it comes to cardio and keeping your gains. Let's shift gears a little bit. Cardio and fat loss. This is a big one. Lots of misconceptions around this. Marty, do you want to start with, I guess, some of the major misconceptions around cardio and fat loss?
Yeah, I think cardio is one of the first things that comes to mind when people think fat loss, and probably for good reason, because it does increase your energy expenditure. Is cardio specifically required to lose fat? No, and that's because you can create an energy deficit without implementing cardio, but it may be easier for people to get to the level of deficit required for them to lose fat at their desired rate if they were to add in cardio. So it can definitely be helpful. A lot of people seem to think that doing cardio early in the morning when you're fasted can produce superior benefits to doing it, for example, later in the day. That doesn't seem to be the case if the energy deficit across 24 hours or over time is equated for. So it's really just a matter of burning a certain number of calories that feeds into your total energy expenditure for the day and then contributes to your energy balance. Whether you do your cardio in the morning, do it at night, is of minimal importance. I think there is some reason to maybe try and implement cardio in the morning from a routine perspective. I found that getting clients, up in the morning, getting them out there, getting some steps in, or getting their calorie burn early in the day can help from a routine standpoint. Means they don't have to do that after work and they just head to the gym, then head home after the gym. So something to keep in mind. But for speaking physiologically, fasted cardio doesn't seem to be superior to doing cardio later in the day. You might also hear that, you know, high intensity interval training is better than low to moderate intensity training. Again, it's just a matter of calorie burn within a certain amount of time. So doing HIIT can get you a higher amount of calories burnt in a shorter period of time. That's going to be really good for some people, but you have to consider the trade-offs that come with that, as Luke has been speaking about. Oftentimes, if we're working with someone who really wants to maximize muscle growth, and is trying to get lean or maximize muscle retention, trying to get lean at the same time, we tend to implement low to moderate intensity cardio instead to take care of some of those trade-offs that would come with going a little bit harder on a bike or on a treadmill or whatever it might be. So I still remember the first contest prep that I did. I was having to do sprints on the treadmill multiple times a week in the morning, fasted
I'd
as
love
well.
to see
So
that.
that was
Bring back Marty on the treadmill.
basically hell. I hated it and I felt shit. My joints felt really bad. And then I switched to doing
Very
it
little joints too.
on
I
the
think that's
cross
important.
trainer.
Important for
Switched to
listeners
doing it
to
on the
know.
cross trainer, which was a little bit better on the joints, but it was still just that. I just hated my time on it, and I'd have to train after it because that's the only time I had to train in the day. Really, this wasn't a good time overall. So looking back, I would have probably benefited more from just doing low to moderate intensity cardio, at least from a training perspective, would have benefited more, and that might have allowed me to retain more muscle as well. So
And
again, whether
having
you do
bigger
one
joints. Bigger
and
joints
bigger
would help.
joints, yeah, bigger joints would help. That's talk to my parents about that one. But it really comes down to time. How much time do you have? If you really need to burn a certain amount of calories in a short period of time, fine, go ahead and do it. People might even enjoy that. And the other thing to consider is that the cardiovascular adaptation itself would be a little different across the two modalities. So if you're looking specifically for more anaerobic adaptations, well then fine, HIIT's gonna help you with that. Whereas low to moderate intensity cardio won't. But if we're speaking from a pure fat loss perspective, then either of the two can work.
I think it's on that, Marty, if I can add,
Yep.
I think it's really important to look at cardio and to understand the terminology that we're using first and foremost. We need to look at it through two separate lenses when we're talking about interference with resistance training versus as a tool for fat loss. Most people, when they're incorporating cardio for fat loss, they're not really interested in the cardiovascular benefits that come with performing a bout of cardio. They're more so focused on the expenditure that will increase or help them achieve a calorie deficit. That's not always the case, but in most cases, that is what people are doing. And I think it's really important to remember that if you're trying to increase your energy expenditure, the tool you use is really not that important. There's just considerations, as Martin said, around whether or not that's going to affect your resistance training performance, number one, because it can obviously impact how hard you're able to train and your recovery, which might lead to muscle loss in a caloric state where you're probably a little bit more susceptible to losing muscle. But not only that when you're in a calorie deficit, you're much more susceptible to some compensatory changes in your expenditure based on your activity levels. So what I see a lot of people do when they start incorporating higher intensity or even moderate intensity bouts of cardio is fantastic. They're burning more calories during the time that they're performing that cardio routine. But then for the periods after, their energy expenditure plummets significantly because they're tired, they're fatigued, and they're going to be sitting more than they're standing. They're probably going to have a nap, whatever the case may be. And that can have a huge impact on your overall calorie expenditure for a 24-hour period and therefore affect your energy deficit. So I think something I've certainly come to use over the last probably like 5 or 6 years is focusing more on total daily step count whilst also having cardio, align with total daily steps, because it gives you a much better snapshot of your total energy expenditure. Whereas if you're just focusing on a bout of cardio, you can sure do your cardio, but then what about the other 23 hours of the day where you might not be moving as much? And I think that can really hurt people's fat loss and is probably something worth keeping in mind. Any
Yeah,
comments on that, Luke or Marty?
yeah. Another thing to consider when it comes to compensation is not only can doing high intensity training lead to that level of compensation that sees your total energy expenditure for the day possibly plateau instead of continue going up, but simply doing more and more cardio, even if it's at a low to moderate intensity, also seems to lead to that level of compensation. So this is known as the energy constraint theory. So basically, as people's physical activity, and will encompass both steps and exercise, as that increases, and we can think of that as being times, as that increases in time, total energy expenditure doesn't seem to continue increasing linearly if the person is already doing quite a bit of exercise, or just general activity, right? So what I mean by this is, if someone's going from 5,000 steps to 10,000 steps, great, that's a big jump. It's probably going to be a linear increase in their total energy expenditure for the day because they're starting from a low baseline. No need for their body to compensate at that point. But if we go from 10 to 20,000, for example, or 15 to 20,000, because we're already doing quite a bit of activity, we don't see a linear increase in energy expenditure. Generally, what it will look like is this: it's going to start to plateau slightly, and that's because at high levels of physical activity / steps, your body will start to find ways to compensate. So yeah, the more cardio you do, the more calories you're going to burn from that specific cardio session. That will always go up, but we need to disassociate that from total energy expenditure for the day. And what will happen is you will start to compensate in other ways, both consciously, right, or subconsciously. And that's what we tend to observe and research across thousands and thousands of people when they assess their physical activity levels in time, and then look at the correlation between that and total energy expenditure. It doesn't seem to be linear. So something to keep in mind: if you're already doing a lot of steps, you're doing 15,000 steps, you've hit a bit of a plateau, do you do more steps? Maybe that's required, but it might not give you the effect that you're after. You might have to look at doing something with your nutrition, or taking a bit of a step back if you're at that point and hitting a plateau.
Yeah, some really good points there, Marty. Out of curiosity, how many steps do you get a day?
Usually on coaching days around 10,000 minimum. At the moment I'm on 7, so
Wow,
I'll be 10 to 12 by the end of
very
the
good.
day.
How many did you get in contest prep in 2016?
Contest prep was a funny one.
Those weeks where we had a big plateau
Yeah.
for 2 weeks. How many did you get?
Yeah, so I mean that's a reason why you should track your steps, right? It probably dropped down to like 2,000 to 4,000 steps. Subconsciously, I didn't realize I was doing less steps. I wasn't tracking them at the time, and my weight plateaued. That's exactly why, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think,
Yeah.
that's a good example of why tracking steps alongside your cardio is a really good idea, because as I said earlier, your total daily step count is a good snapshot of
Hmm.
your energy expenditure. It's not exactly accurate. It's not going to
Yeah.
tell you how many calories you burn. Don't look at
Yeah.
it to give you that kind of information. But it's certainly a very valuable means of giving you insight into just controlling or holding
Hmm.
constant your output as much as you can, because there's a lot less predictability in adjusting variables
Yeah.
related to expenditure than there is related to your intake. So I would always keep that in mind when it comes to fat loss. If you're trying to use any cardio or steps and trying to move that needle to drive fat loss, it's going to be a lot less predictable and consistent than adjustments to your nutrition will be. So you've got to be really tightly controlling most of the variables related to your output. Anything else you guys want to add there, Lukey?
Maybe the only other thing, and I guess you guys, Martin especially, has probably got a better idea of the literature just around hunger and increasing cardio, because especially from like a competition standpoint, or I guess from an anecdotal standpoint with general population clients as well. Like as cardio increases, you often hear that people say, "Oh, I feel so much more hungrier now that I'm running or something," and to my knowledge, I don't think this is necessarily the case that hunger is true. It's almost like they've placeboed themselves, but maybe you guys have a better idea on the literature around that, and like, is it even worth kind of increasing cardio to a certain extent if it's just going to mean kind of that hunger becomes really hard to manage for an individual.
Yeah, I've seen some research where it's quite mixed, where some people actually have their hunger suppressed, especially after higher intensity cardio efforts, like your hip routines and stuff like that. Whereas for some people, it increases. So I think, like most things, it's really going to vary from person to person, much like stress. Some people are stress eaters and they eat heaps, and some people, when they're stressed, they don't eat for hours. So I would certainly recommend that if your goal is fat loss and cardio is leaving you ravenous, probably be very cautious about, jacking up the cardio, and try to find other ways to create a calorie deficit. But I would say for most people, you're not going to run into that kind of issue unless they've been dieting for a very long time, lost a lot of body fat, and or are doing a significant amount of cardio. Marty?
Yeah, I tend to agree. I think I've definitely noticed with new clients as well who start training properly, like with decent intensity, and they start moving more, that their hunger spikes up. Whether that's due to being glycogen depleted and the body signaling high levels of hunger, I'm not exactly sure. Physiologically, I do think that there would be something there, and I guess that's not necessarily a bad thing if the goal isn't fat loss, but if the goal is fat loss, then of course something to consider. And it's again just a matter of stress management. People handle stress differently, both psychologically and physiologically. Like Jacob said, some people will gravitate towards overeating when they're stressed. Others will undereat. So as a coach, you just have to be strategic about how you allocate stress. Doing more cardio, training harder, it it sounds good, sounds like the way to go, but that comes with a cost. And at certain points, especially if someone's getting quite lean, it's not always going to be the best plan of attack, because there are consequences that people might have to deal with when they leave the gym and when they get off the treadmill that will hinder their progress.
Yeah, cool. Well, guys, I think we covered most of the areas we wanted to discuss today. Thank you very much for joining me, Luke and Martin. Guys, we will speak to you all next time, and thank you for listening.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.